Thank you. Um, well, cavemen are interesting. I was always fascinated with them as a kid. And because we're doing this virtual, I won't be, I don't want to switch between slide share and show and tell. So I'm going to do a little show and tell first off. Um, Here's a nice reproduction by Joe Taylor of a saber-toothed tiger. So you can kind of see based on my face and stuff, I'm right even with it. So I'm not playing the big fish game. You can see the actual size this way. Um, and there's been literally thousands of nearly complete skeletons of those found. So we know a lot about them. Um, Here's some actual fossil bones that I've found of saber-toothed tiger leg bones. Um, Another thing I'll be talking about is obsidian. And this is some obsidian I picked up last fall. It's volcanic glass, and it makes a very sharp tool, sharper than our normal surgical tools. And another thing for show and tell I'm going to be talking about is some of the living conditions prior to the flood. I'm not going to talk much about them, but this is the Bertig print. And you can see how big that is. And I remember the first time seeing that and thinking, wow, that's kind of fakey. Well, there's been a lot done to prove the actuality of it. And over time, that is a size 19, probably triple E, size 19 triple E, a person that walked around without shoes on and got wide feet. Size 19 is not all that big. A lot of your professional basketball and football players and stuff will have that size shoe or bigger. Here is a actual basketball player's size 20. And if you go into a professional shoe store where professional athletes come, you can just pull this right off the shelf. Size 19 on that Bertig print is kind of small compared to some of the shoes some of those people buy. And I know the difficulty of finding that of the larger sizes because I wear a size 16. So size 19 isn't all that, it kind of fits right in with my family. So, okay, with that, I'm going to be done with show and tell then, and I'm going to go to the slides. On the first slide, I have my email, and write that down if you want a copy of these slides. We're probably going to look at 75 of them. I've probably got 130 or 140 here that deal with this topic. And so if you want those slides, let me know. Also, I've got a couple of recordings that I did in January before a live audience of some of this information presented a little bit differently and more based on the timeline that we'll be talking about some. And so I've got those slides and videos. Those are available on the web too at St. Lucas Community Church in Lake Elmo. But that'll be on the slides too that you get so you can find that. So what is accurate about these cavemen and what is just story? And so when I got out of college, more than a half century ago, I thought I knew a lot about them because I'd heard a lot about them. But let's take a look at that saber tooth or at the felines here. And we see 4 different ones on the screen. But which one is correct or more correct? Well, the reality is we don't know because as far as I can tell yet, they have not found hair or hide of these to know which one looks more correct. The quote unquote caveman with the big club in the middle with the feline, that's not a saber tooth, but that's probably one of the felines, just the regular one. Another thing too, I forgot to mention is I send out a newsletter on quite a variety of topics 6 times a year. If you want that, let me know and I'll add you to the list. And as I was growing up, once I got into about 3rd grade, I started hearing a lot about prehistorical and evolved and these cavemen and stuff. And I really thought they were neat. I thought they were exciting and I was interested on, here we got a guy doing what I like to do, play with fire when I was a kid. And he's got some fresh lava and he's learning about fire, quote unquote. That's what the story is anyhow. And again, the guy clubbing up in the other picture. So we're going to look at some of these things. Things like hairy, living in caves and huts, being a savage and a hunter for a lifestyle. And looking at the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, it said these people's food is meat and a mixture of milk and blood. That's the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1911. I'd heard they used primitive tools, clubs, started fires, started using fires, and yet in 1951, now we're getting into my school time basically, and here's the encyclopedia saying, yet for many a century, our fathers had no sort of fire at all. That's 1951 encyclopedia. And here's back to the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica. They had limited language and brain. They were often grunting. Their speech was the speech of an owl, of a screech owl. And we'll soon have them back in our area here for the summer. And I don't think their speech was that at all, but we're going to find out as we go along here. 3rd grade, I very specifically remember Mrs. Fox saying that we evolved from animals. And I thought, I don't think so. And I don't know why I thought that, but I very vividly remember her saying that. And that was probably one of the first things I doubted of what she said, because she's the 3rd grade teacher that taught me how to read. My 1st and 2nd grade teacher never got around to doing that. Cavemen were very primitive, I kept hearing. And in college, I heard the same story over, all these same stories. But what is the truthful reality of all of this? We've got now another 60 years of study and much more advanced scientific ways of studying. So what is the truth? Well, one of the first things I needed to do was learn how to interpret data correctly and accurately, because up until then, I didn't know. I'd been in a research position for a couple of years. I then got into law enforcement with the Department of Natural Resources. And in there, for the first 5 years, I was stationed next to one of the best law enforcement investigators in the state of Minnesota. And he was called by many agencies into giving opinions and ideas on solving tough cases. And all kinds of agencies were calling him all the time for his expertise. And I had the privilege of being with him a lot. And he was a believer in Christ, and I was a believer in Christ. But I also was a believer in what I had learned in college, and he had a different opinion. And so what he would do is we'd just be out patrolling, and he'd ask me, have you considered such and such? And this is how he taught me to investigate. Have you considered this? And basically what he was saying is, have you considered all the aspects of all of the data that is associated with this? Don't just go looking for what you want that fits your answer, but look at every aspect. And sometimes literally it would take me 2 months to come with all of the different aspects he was thinking of when he was looking at a certain piece of data. And when you get all of the aspects together, you got a better chance of making an accurate interpretation. So that was kind of my study system there. And here I'm going to show you a couple of examples of where something like that is very important. An accurate timeline and an accurate worldview is important for accurate scientific research. This is a picture I took of a bone. This happens to be a copy of a bone, actually, that was broken as it was being taken out. And there's a lot of evidence there, but evidence by itself cannot settle a debate. You have to have accurate interpretation of that evidence. And then even that won't always settle a debate. So we're going to talk about how to get beyond that evidence. People just don't believe you. So we got this bone here. It's 3.5 feet tall. That's a fairly good sized dinosaur bone. And on March 28th, 2005, it was this original bone that scientists recovered T-Rex soft tissue. 70 million year old fossil yields preserved blood vessels. Now that's some pretty good evidence. Something's going on there. And from a questioning investigator standpoint, what's all going on there? Well, let's look at what, well, there's the problem. Evidence by itself, all of this good evidence, will not settle the debate about when dinosaurs lived. Here's what the researcher who found this is saying. It was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it, I said to the lab technician. And here's what she was seeing: blood cells, complete blood vessels, soft fibrous tissues, and elastic tissues. The bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? And here's the problem. She first questions the evidence and all that goes with that, rather than her timeline and worldview. And that's where the inaccurate interpretation comes about. It doesn't fit, her timeline and worldview doesn't fit with the evidence. Data interpretation can be accurate only if we have a complete, rational, accurate worldview. And so we're going to spend about 10 minutes here looking at how do we determine what is accurate and what isn't. This was from 2005, also in the St. Paul Pioneer Press. Dung confirms that dinosaurs ate grass. Wow, why is that big news? Well, it's big news because scientists weren't looking for grass. Why? Why not look? Well, because they aren't looking at all the data that's available to them. They're only looking for what they want to find. And in what they have been taught is that grass didn't evolve until after the dinosaurs died out. So why look in the dung for grass? Well, if we look at an accurate worldview, we're going to find that grass was created before the dinosaurs. So it was around for dinosaurs to eat. So this investigator was teaching me that we've got evidence, we got information. And from that, we make an interpretation. We've got to look at all of it. And here was my problem, and I think a lot of other people's problems. We've got presuppositions, there's all kinds of inferences, speculations, assumptions. We've got our own personal prejudice, and our overall worldview overshadows our interpretation of the evidence. And that's the problem. How do we get beyond that? How do we get so we actually look at the evidence and look at all of the evidence that its presence? Schweitzer there was just looking at what she wanted to find relative to her evolutionary theory on the blood vessels and stuff. She wasn't looking at all of the evidence. And there's historical and there's scientific repeatable type evidence. Some of it's not repeatable. It's a historical nature. But bottom line is we want to sort out what is an accurate account of what happened versus what's a made up myth. What about from nothing to man? Let's just look at one aspect of that. In man, there is DNA, and DNA is maybe the most complex information there is out there. And a neat thing about information, a unique thing about information in some ways, is it's non-material. And it's a message that's got a purpose and an action expected of it. And that DNA makes everything for us, or gives us, it's all of the pattern for us. And I'm not going to go into a bunch of information, but I want to just show you that on other slides that you'd be getting, there's lots of more information to back up what I'm saying and stuff. But in the laws of informational science, the bottom line is that all information arises only from a mind. Only a mental source can create it. Only a mental source, a mind, can create DNA, because DNA is information. So it takes a mind, it takes a mental source for DNA to exist. It just can't exist any other way. Anything material cannot create something non-material. Our mind is not a material thing, and it can create information. Nothing material can create information. There's no new information without an intelligent, purposeful sender. And again, the bottom line is biological information can only originate from an intelligent mind, an intelligent sender who made that information. So for this evidence and information, the interpretation is never going to be neutral. People are going to argue both ways depending upon if they believe in a mind making information or not, for example. Again, evidence and information by themselves can't settle a debate. We got to get down to the bottom. We've got to get past that, because they can just say, well, sometime we're going to find, or if you got enough time and chance will create whatever. Those are called rescuing devices. But the bottom line is, based on reality and a correct framework, a correct worldview, we can come up with an interpretation. And that base foundation there is what we call an ultimate standard, because it's got to start with a mind. Otherwise, people are going to have faulty presuppositions, and they aren't going to be convinced no matter how good the evidence is. And how many times have you talked to friends and they aren't convinced, and you just gave them the best information you could? You know, it happens all the time. So they need an ultimate standard for that worldview, and then they can have the correct presuppositions for the interpretation of the data and stuff. That non-faulty worldview is where it starts at, where people then can settle a debate, is once both are on the same page. So my question to you is, these are some things that I think exist, but yet many people have no reason for these to exist in their worldview. There's nothing in their worldview says that these things can exist. But personally, I've experienced pain. I think it exists. It's not all in my head, I don't think. Knowledge is a true, justified belief. And so I've got a reason, I've got a justification for why all of these exist. Do you have a justification for why any of these exist? So it gets back to that base foundation, the requirement of an intelligent mind and an intelligent sender, being that ultimate foundation. And that ultimate standard is not confined to the same problems we've got. We've got limitations on space and matter, all kinds of limitations. This ultimate standard has to be outside of those limitations. And it's got to be all knowing and all powerful and present everywhere. If it's going to know everything and be all powerful and not limited by time, all of this fits together. And here's a couple of books that you can learn a lot more on. I probably have spent most of 10 years trying to understand these books in detail. They are very helpful to me. And it's only the God of the Bible that can be that ultimate standard. He's the only one that is outside of all of our limitations and can make all this information. And he's an eyewitness to everything. So that's where we're going to get our time frame from, is someone who was there. So is caveman millions or thousands of years old? And one of the things, let's just look at some of the physical evidence. You know, you got a bone. Is this, this bone, is this human? Is this animal? Is it man? What is it? Well, here we got two piles of bones. On the left-hand side, using DNA, we find that comes from 47 different individual humans. On the right side, all of them, the finders said all come from an ape called Artie. Well, let's look at the facts. Here we got an area. Where did that go? Somehow or another, I lost the location on here and stuff. This is where Artie, this is the kind of area where Artie and Lucy were found. You can see the layers and you can see lots of erosion and stuff. All these layers laid down and then eroded away after some time. But the kinds of fossils found out there are plants, invertebrates, mammals, birds, and human fossils, along with these apes. And, oops, I went the wrong way. A friend of mine was walking out in some private ground in that area and picked up a few different fossils. You can see some of these are a couple, 3 inches across. They're really a beautiful rock, mineralized bone. Here's the facts on Artie. Remember what the area looks like. They spent 92, 93, and 94 looking for parts. Over a 4-mile area, they found these parts. They were scattered bones. They weren't connected. They're disintegrating, some of them. Some of them are very incomplete, but they're pieces. Then they spent another 15 years trying to assemble this into a Artie. And they said Artie was 4.4 million years old. Well, most of the leading paleo experts question most of the claims made about this Artie. Picked up over a 4-mile area over several years and nothing really connecting together. Artie is a typical ape. Lots of those parts are very typically ape. And if you're going to have an evolutionary Artie that's before man, you got a problem. Artie's supposed to be 4.4 million years old. And in Crete, Greece, there's human tracks, 19 or 20 of them, that are 5.7 million years old. And I'd just like to remind you that all of these are from the time of the flood or newer. So they're less than 4,400 years old, or 4,500, or 4,600, or somewhere in that range, your choice. Lucy, we just saw Artie's picked up over a 4-mile area. Lucy comes from a 3-mile area, and 200-foot differences in the layers, and picked up over 2 years. Most of the parts they now know are a diseased chimpanzee, Some Israeli scientists figured out that the jaw is a small gorilla. There's a whole lot of debate yet about what that knee is. And if we got human tracks 5.7 million years old, Lucy comes along a lot later at 3.2 million years. So I hope you're starting to see how interpretation and looking at the evidence and stuff, looking at it from a law enforcement investigator standpoint, there's just lots of red flags in all of this. It just doesn't. This makes sense. 4,500 years makes sense. Here we've got 4 skulls pictures. This is from that 1951 encyclopedia. Java man, Piltdown man, Neanderthal man, Cro-Magnon man. It wasn't until 1952 or 53 that Piltdown was found to be a total fraud. But 1951 encyclopedia still has it there. Java man, that first one there, again, the man looked for 2 years. He found some things in a general location, but they were all separate. They weren't hooked together. There was this extinct ape cap, which is Java man. There were 3 definitely modern human teeth. There was a very nice human thigh bone, and there were 2 other human skulls there. But he wanted to make a name for himself, so he uses this extinct ape cap to be an evolutionary thing. The only part of it is found is the brown part on that Java man. All the white part is speculation. So that again from that encyclopedia. So we've got misassigned bones. I think the possibility is very great that not all of those belong to human or to ape, or instead of just one or the other. And then we've got that information, the DNA. It takes an intelligent mind and a sender to make and get that to us. And again, that intelligent mind is the eyewitness to everything. And that eyewitness says things are only thousands of years old. And eyewitnesses in court generally are pretty good sources. So there's all kinds of timelines out there, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on days in a year. When did the years start and stuff varies, but that 6,000 year time frame, I think, is pretty close. And I'm looking at the timeline that I've got here to show you today is based on the Bible, of course, but archaeological, genetical, geological, and then also the Hebrew language give us some additional information on this timeline. And I think most of it's accurate within 150 years. And an awful lot of it will be accurate within 50 years. Here we've got 2,000 years of the timeline from creation to 2000 BC. And down below, we've got from 2000 BC to the time of Christ, his birth. When was he born? Some years prior to 0. Well, there's no 0 AD, but some years before that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Various debates. I don't have an exact number, but again, I don't have an exact number for most of this timeline. There's a few things we've got exact dates on, but that's it. Whoops, I don't know. That shouldn't have showed up yet. Adam lived 9,000 for 930 years. And normally in the audience, I point out Eve. I don't point out Adam. I point out Eve. But we don't have an audience to point out Eve, so I've got Adam and Eve here for you to see. Basically, what I'm looking at is Middle Eastern. You see he's got a fair amount of hair. How much hair people have? Well, cavemen were supposed to be very hairy. And on the left-hand side are 2 different conditions, genetic conditions, that cause people to have hair all over their body. But those people often are picked on, driven out, and wouldn't have been welcome in society. In a lot of societies, people don't love their neighbor as themselves, and would have ended up being cave people, so to speak. So we've kind of in one short fall swoop looked at hairiness. If you look at all of the hundreds of examples of mummies and of other archaeological finds, we find none of this hairiness. We find hair, very typical of what modern man is, but it's that kind of hair and that amount of hair. We've got Adam and Eve here being middle brown color that provides a genetic way for all of the colors of the human race. And here we see a family married, and they've got twins, and they're not identical twin boys, but they've got a fair amount of color difference, just as twins from the same mother born at the same time. Most of us are somewhere between 180 and 225 generations from Adam, and there's a number of ways to determine that. Well, bottom line here, one of the things about cavemen was that they're very hairy. I don't think that's so much the case. Here, let's look at some more DNA. When you start out, you are one cell. That DNA had all the information you're ever going to have. You're never going to have it added to. And it was when you were the most healthy, you were the most accurately made. And the average human now, I mean, we've got 5,000 plus DNA mistakes. And at the current rate, they figure we're adding 60 to 100 per generation. And you add a few more 100 generations, and we're going to have so much error that we aren't going to be very healthy at all. A lot of possibilities for you genetically. And here's a neat thing for mothers, or for you to think of. Half of you was in with your mother in your grandmother, in your grandmother's womb. And genetically, we are all made in the image of God. So these are all things you can study more by looking at the slides and different things on here. So Adam and Eve have a child named Cain. And Josephus, as well as several other sources, say that they had a lot of kids. In fact, Josephus says they had 33 sons and 24 daughters. We don't know where in that line Cain fits. In addition, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, why just mention those two boys? I don't know. Although in the Hebrew, we find something about one conception and two births by the fact of adding something to. So Cain, something is added to Cain. In addition, she gives birth to his brother Abel. Were they the first twins? It's just speculative, but why not mention them? They're the twin boys. Also, Cain being the first murderer. So different reasons. But as a population increases, birth rates decrease. And so the 33 sons, 24 daughters isn't common today. Although I know one family with 16 and one with 21, all from the same mother, not adopted or anything. And we've got farming going on here, not hunter-gatherer, and that is so often a thing. We'll talk about when you're a hunter-gatherer and when you're a farmer and stuff. And all of this happens in the first 130 years from creation, because Cain kills Abel then, and then Seth is born. We've got farming going on. Well, Cain gets kicked out. Been bad, he killed his brother. He goes and builds a city, not just a little village, he builds a city, it says. So we've got those sons and daughters reproducing, and lots of people out there already. I think of just my personal parents, my dad's and mother's side, 13 on my dad's side and 5 on my mother's side. And I've got 83 first cousins. And then I've got hundreds of second cousins and hundreds more of third cousins. And that's just 3 generations. We don't know where Cain and Abel fit in there, but if they probably weren't the oldest by any means, and we could have 2 or 3 generations 25, 30 years old, fitting in there in that first 130 years real easy. We also find nomads and cattle farming. We've got musical instruments, not only playing them, writing the music, but also making the music or making the instruments and making things from brass and iron. We don't have an Iron Age. We don't have a Bronze Age. We've got all of that very early on here. We do have a few explorers, outcasts, and that's when they become hunter-gatherers. When Cain got kicked out, where did he go? Well, he went to where other people were, and he was afraid he was going to be killed. And he had maybe lived in a cave. Who knows what he did? But he is probably more hunter-gatherer. We got all this other information on Bronze Age, Iron Age, tin, lead, all of that being very early on. Cities and villages being early on. But now we got these Stone Age or cavemen that we keep hearing about and seeing their drawings. By the way, all their drawings are since the flood, because there's over 500 archaeological and written documents talking about the worldwide flood, wiping everything out. And so these are explorers, they're pioneers. There's various reasons for them to go out. Some of them just don't want to live around other people. And some are rebels and convicts. Some want to escape from their enemies. And if you're one of the people that had hair all over your body, maybe you want to be out of there because those people are picking on you all the time. Nice cave living today. 20 to 40 million people live in caves today. There's some up in the air right now in that International Space Station. To me, that's a form of cave. I don't know what you think of it as, but it's pretty neat, pretty expensive, pretty interesting cave. And as you're leaving society, so to speak, to be a cave person or to get to a different area that's pioneering, it's limited how much stuff you can take with you and how much other people that are around you there are going to be able to make and do. A lot of the technology you might know gets left behind. And caves. Here's typical caves today. Quick shelter, provides some safety and from the elements and other things. Most caves are in that 50 to 60 degree range, so the heating and cooling isn't so bad. Most of them about 10 feet wide, 13 feet high, and 21 to 25 feet deep. And depending upon where you live, what it might look like. In China, there's a big area where they have a lot of caves. This is what the area looks like. There's caves. People, oh, look at there, down below. Those are cave houses where the stuff's all been dug out. It's all caves, but that whole area in 1556 had an earthquake late in the evening, and it was between about an 8 to 8.3 earthquake, and they estimate that 830,000 people died. Most of them were cave dwellers. And this earthquake was pretty phenomenal. It had some 60-foot deep crevices and landslides, and it was so strong it was felt in 97 surrounding countries, not counties. Countries. In 1975, there was a similar earthquake about 200 miles south of there. Again, about an 8.1. They had the Richter scale then. But look what it did to these railroad tracks. This was a 10-second long earthquake. Here's modern cave. These are all caves. 1998, I had the privilege of being down in the Yucatan, and this was the typical house down there. And the church was maybe 20 feet wide, maybe 25 feet wide by about 40 foot long, made the same way. These are huts, caves, huts, all kinds of things that using readily available natural material. Here are some of the Mayan people. This is me, well, 20 some years ago. And look at the height of those people. Genetically, they're fairly similar. I've got about 100 different genes that say I'm taller for some reason. Well, caves and huts, really no big deal. You use what's available and you live where you can. Here we've got the 10 patriarchs ending up with Noah, and Noah gets us beyond the first 2,000 years. And here's an stone or cuneiform tablet with the 10 patriarchs listed on. That was just found in the early 1900s. Before the flood, we had these better living conditions, longer human lifespan, larger plant growth, and people were vegetarians or supposed to be vegetarians only. The animals are supposed to be vegetarian also only, and both had corrupted and wasn't the case anymore. Here's that vertig print I showed earlier, side 19. But you say, well, there's been over 20 different sites in Minnesota, finds of people of this size. Large, long leg bones, different things. There's a few different sites, but there's over 20 large people sites finds in Minnesota. This Bronze Age, that was right away, wasn't a long time. Here's 101 Bronze Age living prior to about 1200 BC people. They looked at the DNA of these 101, and they found that about 5,000 years ago, the DNA diversified. Well, there was a bottleneck about 4,000 years ago. And what does the eyewitness say? It was about 6,000 years ago that we started diversifying, and about 4,400 years ago, there was a bottleneck. And here's some sources you can do to look at for that. That bottleneck was Noah, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. That's the genetic bottleneck. So we've got them. And then we've got Shem, the second aged son, coming around again into less than 2000 BC. And again, the people at this time were supposed to be vegetarian only up to the time of the flood. And Methuselah is Noah's grandfather. In Hebrew, when he dies, God's judgment will come. Methuselah, when he dies, God's judgment will come, and the flood came. And this, I think, is an important thing. The flood fossils, all of the fossils we find, is a snapshot of all that was alive at the time of the flood. So we've got an excellent record, a historical record of what was alive at the time of the flood. What was alive 4,400 years ago about? If you want an easy way to remember the approximate time of the flood is just remember 2345. About 2,340 or 2348 is closer, maybe 2345 years before, or BC, 2,345 years BC plus 2021 AD. So we got about 2,350 years or so, give or take. In the flood, we get sorting based on different reasons. These are a few of the reasons. And so we're going to have different things in different layers. And what's all found with dinosaurs? Look at the plants, the invertebrates, the mammals, the birds. This is the kind of mix you'd expect if the whole world gets all scrubbed down and beat up. And since the flood, the conditions of living have changed a lot. In 2/3 or more of the species have gone extinct for the most part. And the really dangerous ones like dinosaurs and stuff, we've killed off, make sure they don't get us. Here we've got a neat fossil, a mammal, similar to the Tasmanian devil, that had eaten a parrot dinosaur. So we got a dinosaur in with a mammal. Again, this evolutionary story doesn't fit from an investigator standpoint very well. Homo sapiens and apes were all living at the time of the flood. And basically from the neck down, all of these fossils that are found are either ape or human. They fit in one group or the other. For instance, here, a couple hundred miles north of Mount Ararat, we've got 5 skulls. You can see 3 of them there, all found in the same, well, they're pretty close together. This is the way they were found. And they said they were 3 different human groups, Homo erectus, etc. But all of these are just basically age differences and health differences. And I thought this article from GeoTimes, Humans, One Big Family, March 2000, kind of made an understatement. Genetics shows that human populations have long been linked. Well, genetic shows that human populations have been the same since the beginning, not just long been linked. These guys are all living at the same time. We've got variety within a kind, all kinds of different humans, and variation with that kind. So I think they're all Homo sapiens. Here's Homo erectus, definitely the Homo sapien. And here's some of the things it could do. And again, we don't have time to look at all that tonight, but you can study that. Again, we either got humans or we got apes, and both are found in the same bone beds. But basically from the neck down, they're either humans or they're apes. And here we got the humans, here we've got the apes, and there's a big dividing line between. 17% of the DNA on this side is unique only to humans. It's not on the other side. The earliest human bones are distinctly human. Here's some more information that you can study, but the bottom line is the human 3D genome is distinctly unique to humans. It doesn't fit with the apes. Here we got a female Neanderthal, and her parents, they know from DNA, were half siblings. And we don't have a skull other than a jawbone here. In 2012, a 13-year-old girl was found with 2 different quote unquote evolutionary whatever. No, they're just plain humans, Homo sapiens, and different variety within that kind. Recently, they took 28 different pictures and different wavelengths of all the Dead Sea Scrolls. They found where Noah's Ark, one of the Hebrew words is to be gathered, to gather. God did the genetic selecting of the Ark passengers. And I think that's a real important thing. God brought the animals to the Ark, the birds to the Ark. God selected Noah and his 3 sons and their wives as the genetic material, as the genetic bottleneck. Everything was selected genetically by God to go on that ark. Ark came to rest on the Mount of Ararat, and we see Ararat on the map here in the red. We look at the 90th oldest DNA, the Egyptian mummies, the 90th oldest Egyptian mummies DNA. We'll get it right yet. So we're looking at the DNA of the old Egyptian mummies, and it all shows that this is where they came from. They didn't grow up in Africa and move up to Egypt. They were in this area, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and Iraq. That's where they genetically come from. And there's some documentation for you to study. The first farming after the flood, well, that's about 4,400 years ago. Well, they say 23,000 years ago, but here's what they find. Lots of things that show a pretty good society. and it's all the way down here at the southwest shore of the Sea of Galilee. Some of the things they find are the obsidian tools, 140 different plant species. 36% of the plants are domesticated. Does that mean this is the first farm like they were just saying? I don't think so. You can't have 36% already genetically selected for domestication if it's the first farm. And there's a large number of plants that we call weeds that are associated with farming. Again, 4,400 years ago and less. These are domesticated foods that are being raised. Here's a neat thing on obsidian. I showed you those volcanic glass rocks earlier. Surgery with stainless steel tools on the right with an electron microscope. It's probably not your best choice. For some of the best heart surgery now, and I don't know where else, they're using obsidian because it's the sharpest thing that they can get. It's like 500 times sharper than most other instruments. There's less scarring, especially in the early part of the healing process. They are more sterile, and you can see the difference there. And just looking at this electron microscope on all of the material that could be stuck in that surgical sharp blade on the right. They're more durable, and they can use them 10 to 20 times. They're sharper than diamond. Surgical scalpel generally is a one-time use. And they can also be used with an MRI. In Paris, France, 43 miles south, they found a skeleton, amputated arm. They know what drugs and what antibiotics they were using. And in southern France, there's birthing caves, just like our birthing rooms now. And they had pictures showing the position the woman should take for the various stages of labor. And these caves provided protection, more even temperature and stuff, and lots of fresh air controlled in there naturally. A lot of you have heard of the Icca Stones. I could have brought one copy to show you tonight, but I didn't. But there's different advanced technology of all kinds, and these are 400 BC to 700 AD. And some of this stuff isn't duplicatable today, like how they were made. Or why would they be able to accurately draw things that are only visible today with an electron microscope? That's some pretty good technology if you can draw that accurately, and it's only in recent years with an electron microscope that we can see that accurately enough. Well, tools, very spectacular in a lot of ways in the past, in my opinion, not just a bunch of stones. Here's a recent murder. Well, on May 6, 1950 in Denmark, they found this guy and thought he had been recently killed. They looked at his last meal. You know, we have 7-grain cereal or whatever. He had 40 different kinds of seeds in his porridge, his last meal. They fingerprinted him, and they weren't finding clues. So they carbon dated him and found out he'd been dead for over 2,000 years, 300 BC approximately. But he looked just like he had just freshly died, and he's one of the bog people. Over 500 of these bog people have been found buried in the bogs in Denmark. Well, I didn't spend a lot of time on food tonight, but 40 different kinds of seeds at your breakfast. A lot of people have a hard time eating 40 different kinds of foods in 1 or 2 days. You think of the main things you eat. You eat 40 different kinds of things, and he's got them all in one breakfast. What was lunch and supper like? Who knows? Continuing on, we got this major ice event. And that time is a time of Job. And it takes warmth for an ice event. And you can study more on that. Job mentions it 3 times. Most of the oceans were like 90 degrees warm and warmer. We got high evaporation, we got low melting, and the oceans dropped 400 to 600 feet. We got a lot of land bridges, and they're just now starting to do a lot of archaeology in that first 200 to 400 feet and finding lots of early habitation and life that they hadn't looked for before. And it's all the way into Job before disease is mentioned in the Bible. Here's 2018 in Turkey. And they've done some study on this. There was an extreme drought 8,000 years ago. Well, we had a cooling event called the Ice Age about 3,500 years ago or so. And they can look at the fat of these animals and stuff and learn how that cooling event affected those animals and stuff. It's called Ice Age. Here's another Ice Age event. Otzi was found about 300 miles north of where his axe, the copper from his axe was made or forged, and where the flint tools came from. Here's his axe. He's got insulated shoes. You can see what's left of him on the left, except his clothing was on him, his hair was on him. There was lots of things. This is from the time of Abraham to the time of Job about. And looking at his clothing and stuff, the quality of it, he had an antibiotic first aid kit with him. Do you have an antibiotic first aid kit at home? He had a fire starting kit with him. He had more than a dozen arrow shafts and a couple of completed arrows and arrows in the process of being made. He's got a 20th century braided grass cape. Well, he's got a 4,000-year-old grass cape that was popular yet into the 20th century. And there's our caveman on the right. Just like, looks like you or I in some ways, or at least somebody we know. He had a lot of tattoos on him. He knew about acupuncture, and they believed he suffered from bladder problems and stomach aches and really had whipworms as the actual problem. And he knew how to use this acupuncture to reduce the pain. And the tattoos were charcoal based. So continuing on, we got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph here. Work on that on your own. But people are dispersed. After the Tower of Babel, there's many languages, they're spread out, lots of pioneers, lots of cavemen. 4,718, let's see, 4,400 years ago, 4,700, and not too far off for Chinese people and their calendar. Papua New Guinea, today there's 839 languages known just on that island. Language and writing, well, from the very beginning, excellent language, excellent writing. And I've got a couple of slides, 4 or 5, that show how we know who the authors are of Genesis and how Moses compiled them. And it's all from the Hebrew that we can actually tell who wrote the various parts of the book of Genesis. Moses compiled that, and then he wrote the other 4 books of the Pentateuch. Here's Papua New Guinea, 1948. Very close friend of mine, his parents were missionaries in Papua New Guinea starting about 1945. He was born in 1948. The people were basically using only stone tools up through the early 1950s over there. Here's a fire piston. That's a neat thing to look up. It's basically making a diesel engine out of wood. And you can see the little glowing fire there. You just push that down fast and you get compression to the point where it creates fire. And now you got a glowing coal, very easy to start a fire with. Fred likes to tell about his friends, some of the older guys in the tribe, in the people group there in Papua New Guinea. And once in a while, they would take their blowguns and be successful at bringing back a kangaroo. And that was one of their delicacies. And he always thought that was a pretty fine delicacy to be able to get a kangaroo, have kangaroo supper. And the red kangaroo is still alive in Papua New Guinea. It's not Australia just for kangaroos. Well, we've got hunters, savages. Well, they were hunting and living as needed or as they wanted in all of these conditions. We've heard about these cavemen for so long, it's hard to keep thinking what's accurate and what's not. We just get biased by what we've heard and heard and heard. But really, if we get back to what's the source of information, it's an intelligent mind. Everything he says then is accurate. And that the flood fossils are a snapshot of what was alive all at the same time of the flood. That's an important thing. And so you think, was this something from before the flood? Well, then it's fossilized. Or was it after the flood? Well, it might be fossilized, it might not. It doesn't take very many years under the right conditions. Well, not very many days or weeks for the right conditions to produce a fossil. And these cave people, they went to new places. There was a lot less technology and materials available. There were less people with other variety of skills available there in their new place. And so they lived in the conditions, they hunted in the conditions, they ate what was available. And we as humans are unique, and we're in groups and cultures. We're not an evolved different kinds, we're all humans. Here's the slide that talks about where the two 45-minute sessions on the timeline are. So in summary, kind of, I heard or saw a lot about prehistorical and evolved and the primitive tools and stuff. None of that really fits with when you look at all of the evidence. We've got history, written history, right from day one. And we've got very advanced tools to very primitive tools used all the way up to recent times. I don't know, a month ago or so, I was trying to knock loose, well, no, probably about 2 weeks ago, the snow had started melting pretty good. I was trying to knock loose some chunk of wood that was frozen in the ground, and I found a rock and I was using it. I'm a genuine caveman. The limited language and brain capacities are not showing up at all. Very excellent languages, very diverse languages, and very wide variety of brain size, but brain size and intelligence don't always correlate at all. The hair, well, occasional genetic people with problems, but in general, a variety only. Where they lived, the huts, the caves, hey, what's available? What's going to protect me tonight till I can do something better? Or maybe I'll choose to live in a cave all my life, which 20 or more million people do today. The food, wow, very diverse, very excellent in a lot of ways, more excellent than some of our meals today. If you aren't getting acts and facts, I would say, please do so. This is a monthly magazine put out free by the Institute of Creation Research. And you can go to their website, and every month there's a new issue up on there, and you can see the whole thing. This coelacanth issue here in March, just a number of different articles in there each month that I find very interesting. And the CEO now of that is a man that many of you know, Dr. Randy Galuza. And he'll be speaking north of the cities here the last part of April. And I think if you go to tccsa.cc, you'll find it. You're going to see things like this on the news and the internet. The oldest artwork, 12 hand stencils, 39,900 years old, found in Indonesia. And with that, in 6 caves, there's 900 stencils and 6 drawings. Those look very much human modern hands. How do you look at that picture? Is it pre-flood? Well, it didn't get scrubbed off the face of the earth. That means it's post-flood. So the people that have reviewed this study say that those people doing the study had some technical difficulties with the dating method. I would say so. Calling it 39,000 years old versus 4,500 doesn't quite fit. Here we've got 38,500. Well, again, it's after the flood, and it's made with a red crayon. And quote unquote, the oldest red crayon or the oldest crayon found is about 10,000 years ago. Here we've got the hand stencils again with a pig, 4,000 some years later than the other hand stencils. But again, was it pre-flood or post-flood? So hopefully these will be things you can think about and consider. So with that, I rushed through it maybe a little faster than I had counted on. But
well, thank you. Thank you very much, Don. You know, at this point, if we're a live meeting, and by the way, everyone, in June, we hope to have a live meeting when Don Byerly comes. But at this point in a live meeting, we would be passing a basket, and people have asked, can we give an offering online? And yes, you can. Remember our website, tccsa.tc. That's Twin Cities Creation Science Association. And the .tc sounds like Twin Cities. It's actually Turks and Caicos Islands. It's a tropical island that gives us our, our web address. But you can go to the website, tccsa.tc, and there you go to donate, and you can donate online. And even though we're not having to pay our speakers for travel, it still costs to keep up the website and to reimburse the speakers. Everybody who works with TCC is a volunteer. When I first attended back in the 1980s, I noticed that all the volunteers were old men. Now I'm one of them. We need young people to join the board and to come on as volunteers to keep this going until the Lord returns. So Don, take it away with questions and answers.
Hey, Don, this is Brian Riddle. Thank you very much for your talk. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I didn't know I had that quality of, I saw a few other names too. I didn't know who all was listening.
Yeah.
Great.
yeah, Riddle. I used to get a lot of jokes about it, but yeah. Anyway, I have a question about you showed one of the, I think it was a vase that had an inscribing of a guy riding a Triceratops.
Okay, yeah.
And you mentioned that something about a electron tunneling microscope. They didn't have something like that back then. And I lost the context of what you were trying to convey there.
Okay, thank you for asking that. The question is on the Icca Stone. There are various, about 15,000 of these stones have been found, and lots of them just have everyday type things on them. But some have depictions of people with dinosaurs, for example. Others, there's one of a surgery room, and based on the lighting and the thickness of the cord, I believe it's some kind of a magnetic electricity that they're using there in that operating room. There's others examples of a heart transplant or the birth of a baby or just common surgery things. But then this electron microscope comes into play. There are at least one very accurate depiction of a part of the human body that they've only been able to see with the electron microscope, but yet it is drawn out precisely on the Icca Stone. And today they don't know yet how they carved these Icca stones. They can't duplicate it. There's technology. If we're made in God's image, how, Adam sits there and names all of the animals. I don't know if it took him a couple hours or how fast he did it, but he didn't find a mate there. But he named them all. That's a pretty good language, and thinking and way associated to remember them. Phenomenal. I couldn't do that. I'd make up all kinds of gibberish, and if you asked me 2 hours later, I wouldn't remember what I called them for the most part. So does that help to understand the electron microscope? Today we can see that those parts because we have good quality microscopes, the electron microscope at one level, and they couldn't, somehow or another, they saw that enough to be able to accurately draw it.
Okay.
How they did it, I don't know.
Did any of your slides have the references to that stuff so I could look it up?
I can put that in. ICA is Icca Stone. If you start looking there, you're going to find all kinds of pro and con articles and stuff. Again, you need to sort through what's evidence and what's conjectured thought and what's real. Well, what do you really see is what's real.
Yeah, I've seen some of those stones before, but I had never heard the similarity that you drew with the electron microscope, tunneling microscope. So thank you. That's cool.
Okay. Next question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm no expert on the electron microscope or anything like that. So I am going off of what I feel is accurate. If I look at those items and compare them to how electron microscopes would draw, or how a person would draw what a dinosaur looks like, or an everyday thing that we see, that it's plausible to me that this is accurate. So, somebody else?
Yeah, Don, this is Julie. And my question is about, you mentioned about there's 20 plus large people sites in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate more on that?
Well, not so many 20 sites. If I said that, there's 20 examples found at a number of sites.
Okay.
And there's some place I would have the documentation on that. I don't know right off, but if you start looking around at those towns that are listed on the slide, you should be able to find information on the large people.
You mean like they're people that have died and their skeletons are in the ground that they've dug up, or?
Yeah, parts of skeletons generally is what it is.
Okay.
One thing that I didn't put down would be from Murray County, I'm pretty sure it is, on the Buffalo Ridge. Our neighbor to the west of us had found a rock with a handprint in it, very obvious handprint. And so he called the Minnesota Geological Society, They sent the person out. They took the rock and they refused to acknowledge it exists. They never gave it back to him. They never told him a thing. It just plain was fraudulently stolen and hidden or destroyed. I don't know which, but I know the man. I know where he found it. I know the location. I have Mr. Hurd was always he's deceased now, but he was always a very honest, upright man. I have no doubt to believe. I did not see the rock, but I have no doubt to believe that that's truthful. And he did not get a picture of it, which is a shame. This was in the late 50s or early 60s. So again, there's lots of other evidence out there that we aren't looking for that's right in front of us a lot of times because we're not looking for something. I can remember as a kid finding different, I like cavemen. I liked all those stories. I was looking for stuff from them. And I found what very possibly could have been a pretty deadly stone weapon. It was one of the things I found over the years. Scrapers and stuff like that were not uncommon. And some arrowheads and more modern things like that. Go ahead. Who's next?
A number of years ago, I bought that book, Buried Alive, at one of the
Yes.
meetings. And that, has anybody done any further work on that? And that's still accepted as the truth that those skulls that, like they said in the book, they are different than most human skulls, but that they were the people in Genesis that lived many hundreds of years old, and their brow ridges kept growing and different things, facial bones, but that they were the old people of Genesis. Is that, anybody found any more information on that? Or?
Well, there's two things that I'm not going to answer your question exactly because I don't know the full answer on that, but Contested Bones is a very excellent modern book. Robert Carter and Dr. Robert Carter and Dr. John Sanford, I think, wrote that together, if I remember right. And I think it's Contested Bones. Is that correct, Ross or Ellen? Contested Bones?
That is correct. That is
Julie?
correct.
Okay, yeah. The other thing is one of the two people, well, three people that I'm referring to were all who I would consider fairly close friends that would qualify as Neanderthals in how their skulls were and how they looked. That's just the way it was, one woman and two men. And one of the guys was a pretty famous speaker and often referred to him as a Neanderthal. There you go, Contested Bones. Thank you, Julie. That's got a lot of, that's probably a 2017 or so book. So pretty much accurate up to about 2017. Things are being found all the time, and things are being hidden all the time, and things are being uncovered all the time that were hidden for many years. So yeah, I think this is all changing. And the more we find, the more I read, the more I study, the more solid the evidence that the ultimate standard, God, is accurate. His word is accurate. Anybody else?
Don, this is Pat Hurt. You talked about the ancient man supposedly grunting and screeching. And I think I've heard or read that the further back you go, the actually more complicated languages were. Like, I don't know what all the ancient languages were, but they're extremely complex. And do you know about that? Or
I'm not a linguist per se, Um, without a doubt, at the Tower of Babel, things split out. There's very much variety of language today. You just think of it, again, I'm going to say Adam naming all the animals in short period of time. That's pretty developed language. I mean, I don't know if he gave a genus and species, quote unquote, to each of them or just called them whatever, but I don't care if he gave them a one word name and it was only one example of each kind. We've still got lots of names in a short period of time. And one other thought that struck us, it's floated away. I don't remember on the language being more complicated in the past. Yeah, I don't remember what I was going to say.
Okay, thank you.
Ryan, you got a question? I see ya.
Yeah, I do. You'd mentioned about those footprints in Tracos in Crete that were
Yeah.
5 million years old. How did the evolutionists try to explain that?
Well, I have not put a lot of study into that. If you look, you can look up about it and you can see all the controversy about it.
Okay.
But there's a fair amount of evidence there to me that says this is at the time of the flood, probably, and fresh made tracks, kind of like this birding print, you know.
Right.
You've got to have the right conditions. You've got to have that liquefaction and the limestone and stuff, and somebody walking in it to leave a print like that.
Right.
And there's conditions that were right at the time at Crete, and I haven't studied that in detail enough. But the location I give you on the slide and stuff should lead you to be able to study that in more detail.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of this is a sprinkling to allow you to study deeper. And just kind of tease you a little bit with some good information, and now you got to go dig it. That's kind of how I was taught. Okay, you tell me all the evidence associated with that. Have you considered? Yeah, well, I considered these 18 things now on this topic, and you still say I haven't considered them all. Okay, so see you here in about 3 days again. Hopefully I can come up with one or two new have you considered aspects, and you'll see when at some point he will say, okay, yeah, you've done a pretty good job on that. He won't tell me always what all he's figured out besides, but well, sometimes he would, especially on real cases. Then we'd do combined brainstorming and stuff, and that's always a lot of fun. You get somebody that's smart and you get to talk with them and stuff, and you can just be blown away kind of sometimes at their thinking. So, yep, on the island of Crete there, they got some controversy going about those footprints. And I think that's good. You see two sides of the story, but what actually fits the evidence? And what all is the evidence? And have you considered all the aspects of the evidence?
Right.
Who's next?
Any evidence that there is that early people might have hunted small dinosaurs and eaten them? Maybe bones found at campsites?
Okay, in northern Canada, someplace, there's frozen dinosaur bones. And I'm trying to think, I right off can't place, but I think there's at least 2 times that I'm aware of where it's very obvious human-made chopping or knife marks on dinosaur bones that I think are well documented. I couldn't put together either of those places now, but over the years I've run across them. When it comes to any of the quote unquote ice age animals, that's just a real common thing to find man bones on those and stuff. I think after the flood, the conditions were such that there weren't that many big populations of dinosaurs, and that were around were dangerous, and they tried to get rid of them, and they got rid of them any way they could. And you hear all the way up into the 1600s some pretty well documented stories of how they're trying to kill them and stuff. Back to the Papua New Guinea and my friend that grew up there as a missionary kid. There's still occasionally in the 20th century, the 1900s, supposed sightings of 2 or 3 pterodactyls a couple of different times over there. I don't know how accurate they are, but a lot of times people that see them, that's not their principal thing. It's kind of a side mention that was just out of the ordinary. And I put a fair amount of credulence into that kind of a statement from somebody that they've got nothing to gain or lose, and it's really not their principal interest. It's just kind of a side note. And oftentimes those turn out to be a lot more factual than people want to, at first sight, consider them. Anybody else?
Yeah. The people that took that stone in from Murray County, was that the Minnesota Geological Society? Is that what you said?
That is the best I can remember. It was a geological survey, or I don't remember what the exact name of the organization. It's a governmental organization. I can remember him telling me it was a governmental organization, and they sent, and I don't remember if they sent one or several people down, but they said they were going to take it back and study it. He trusted them. That's just the kind of man he was. And he wrote them a number of times, and they wouldn't acknowledge anything.
Wow.
And they never gave it back to him and never told him a thing about it.
Wow.
This is the same thing that happened to a lot of ancient or giant skeletons that were found in the 1800s. They reported to the officials, and the officials took, like the Smithsonian, took them, and you never heard from them again.
Yeah, and once in a while now, in different museums, enough information comes out to cause some people to feel that something that was invalid, didn't fit their paradigm 2 generations ago or a generation ago, now is okay to bring out. And all of a sudden, a bunch of stuff gets found at a museum. How often do you hear about something found or studied that had been laying around there for 20 years or 100 years or whatever? And now they've got a new understanding of it that deals with some reality. I mean, I see that fairly, well, every few years at least you see something like that in the news. I think we're about out of time. I thank each one of you for being here. I hope I've tickled your mind a little bit to do some more looking. I hope you understand the importance of it takes an intelligent mind to make information. I hope if there's only one point you got out of tonight is information doesn't come from a material thing. It takes a mind. It takes an all-knowing, all-powerful mind that's outside of the limitations of where we are today to make. And DNA is the most complicated information we got. So that's pretty phenomenal to me, that one bottom line there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Don. Thank you very much. You know, the thinking about cavemen, it has led so many people astray about the origin of the human race, but it's also led to some very current inhumanity. Australian Aborigines were collected as specimens of primitive man. Arobanga was a African pygmy who was kept in a zoo because he was a primitive creature. So there's been real human suffering in addition to intellectual and spiritual disaster from wrong ideas. Well, everyone, this talk will be on YouTube once it gets processed. And when that happens, you can freeze the frame and you can write down those websites that you didn't pick up. And also in a couple of weeks, Don will be interviewed by our own blogcaster, Ellen, and we'll maybe go into more depth on some of those questions. So thank you, Don, and thank you everyone who tuned in.